Chapter 1. Blank Pages. Nasky looked herself in the mirror and tried to accept the fact that she had multiple personality disorder. It had recently surfaced. She had been in her apartment looking for a job in the newspaper, and the next thing she knew, she was in the park with completely different clothes on, and it was 2 days later. When she had told her doctor, he had performed a series of tests on her, one of which during she had a blackout. When she woke, the doctor told her that she did indeed have MPD. She took in a shaky breath. The other personality called herself Kaywin. She was a daredevil. She took risks that Nasky could never dream of taking. She was confident, charismatic, and she stood up for herself and what she thought was right. Everything Nasky was not. Nasky remembered the look on the doctor's face when he had told her. Something had been wrong. She knew it. There was something else going on in her head, and she wanted to know. However, he hadn't said a thing. So, Nasky continued looking in the mirror at her oval face, her big blue eyes, and her auburn hair. Nasky, you... She swallowed. She couldn't bring herself to say it. Saying it meant that it was true, and she didn't want to believe it was true. Nasky had looked up NPD and found out that the majority of it happened in abuse victims. She had never been abused as a child. Her parents had died in a car wreck soon after she turned 18. She had inherited what little money they had and endured. Her father had been a hard-working man that she admitted was not the best father in the world, but he tried. Her mother was sweet and gentle despite her bipolar disorder. Maybe that was it. Nasky glanced from the mirror to her wall, where a picture of her and her parents hung. Her mother's bipolar disorder might have contributed to whatever was going on in her head. Multiple personality disorder. Nasky spoke to the mirror. She scowled at herself. You're an idiot. She sighed heavily and gave up. This was impossible. Nasky grabbed her sweater. As she was slipping into it, there was a knock at the door. She lifted her head, startled. She wasn't expecting anyone. She didn't know anyone well enough to have them come over to her apartment. She pushed her feet into her shoes and opened the door to her 2-story apartment. A chilly wind blew in her face, making her wince back. She blinked rapidly and looked at the young man standing on her porch. He had blonde hair, the reflection from the moon behind him making it look white. His eyes were a stunning green, and he smiled with perfect teeth. Nasky stammered. Can I help you? Yes. The man reached into his pocket, searching for something. I'm looking for Nasky Vidal. I'm she. Nasky furrowed her eyebrows, confused. What is this about? The man's hand shot out of his pocket suddenly. Nasky saw a flash of silver and moments later felt a sharp pain in her stomach. She stared at the man, confused. She had never seen him before, never met him. She felt blood pool and drip down her shirt. He pushed her slightly, and she felt the blade slip from her stomach as she fell to the ground, numb. Nasky laid there, her mouth open as she took in slow, painful breaths. He whispered, "Long live the Zelturi." He turned and walked away, not even bothering to close the door. Trembling as the pain began to set in, Nasky forced herself onto her side. She let out an agonized gasp and lay still, trembling. Her hands shivering, she reached into her pocket to find her phone and realized it was still upstairs in her bedroom. "Help," she whispered weakly. Fear consumed her as her eyes blurred. She felt weak and lightheaded. The light behind her closed eyelids was suddenly blocked out by a shadow. She opened her eyes long enough to see a figure standing over her. Then she closed her eyes and she fell unconscious. Plague was no ordinary person, and he knew that. He hadn't aged a day ever since he turned 21, just as the rest of his kind didn't. Human diseases, they were called. Anomalies in the world. They hid their secret simply to survive, just as humans hid theirs. Diseases had it much rougher than humans, however. Humans, when found by a disease, have only a chance of getting sick. When a disease was found by a human, there was 100% chance of attempted murder on the human's part. The sad thing was that the murder of diseases wasn't illegal. So the diseases hid amongst the humans as they always had, never releasing their secret to the world, and only moonlight on their chest could prove what they were, which is why it was death sentence for Plague to be strolling along down the street with his button-up shirt open to reveal a slightly muscled chest. He didn't fear the humans as most diseases did. He captured the humans, put them into darkness, and swallowed their sight. He was Cataracts. Plague had been born as Cataracts so long ago he couldn't count the years. He wasn't horribly deadly or powerful. After all, he only affected the eyes. However, he did take human sight away, and that was what they needed the most in these days. He took away their ability to live as they once had, and he often crippled people for life. He was not afraid to walk the streets with his mark showing. Even though he infected humans and was supposed to not care for them, he did notice a blonde-headed disease running away from a human's apartment complex. He watched the man run, and though he didn't recognize the disease, he did know that a disease running was bad. Either humans were chasing after him, or he had killed a human. Plague waited a moment, and upon not hearing any screaming, he went for the latter. He jogged across the street and saw one of the doors of the apartments opened. Inside, he saw Boot. Cautiously, he edged forward. He saw a girl with reddish-brown hair lying limp on her side, blood pouring from a wound in her stomach. She was shaking heavily. For a moment, she looked up at him. He saw her dark blue eyes filled with terror, and he smirked softly. The poor thing was dying and asking him for help. He watched as she fell unconscious. He knelt down and shuffled through her pockets. She had nothing, but as he pulled his hand away, his thumb brushed across her shirt, smearing blood on his hand. He lifted his hand and looked at it, and then his gaze turned down to look at her. She was weak and injured. By the looks of things, she lived here alone. Plague's hunger for the weak got the better of him. He knelt down beside her, pulling his shirt from her shoulders and revealing a well-muscled but thin body. He wadded up his shirt and pressed it against her wound. He then lifted her up in his arms and disappeared down the street, her head resting against the mark of the disease.